Bang ding ding, trademark. He come out 6'7" tall. Bang ding ding, one is star. Bang dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding dong ding. It is a perfect day.
Woke up to the sound of the garbage truck again. Upstairs neighbor's toilet's leaking on my head. Cars broke down, I missed the bus, there runs a 10. I had a feeling this was a day to stay in bed. I finally left my pad right under Jumbo's cloud roof. A police officer pulled out his gun and said, I said, sir, you got the wrong guy. I guess it's just the perfect day. It's just the perfect day. Na, 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 na.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to Eggs. Today's special guest is Ryan Weiss. Ryan is the co-founder and CEO of Weiss Software, a firm who specializes in providing cost-effective web and software development solutions. After more than 20 years of building and shipping software, 6 years in building high-velocity development teams, publishing 2 books, acting as lead architect for countless projects, and being awarded Microsoft's MVP award 3 times, Ryan decided to take his skills and move into a more entrepreneurial space. Unlike most software development teams, Weiss Software utilizes modern toolkits and a globally distributed team to bring clients impressive design at a reasonable price point. The unique structure of his team allows Ryan to remain very hands-on, helping to create architecture patterns, processes, and best practices that maximize velocity and ROI. Joining us for a discussion about buying versus building, when to invest in custom software development, red flags to watch out for when hiring a software development agency, making the software development process much more affordable, and so much more, please join us in welcoming to the show, Ryan Weiss. Hey, Ryan, how are you, man?
I'm good. How are you guys doing?
Excellent. Yeah, thanks for joining us, taking the time to do this.
Sure. Thanks for having me on the show.
Of course.
So let's kick things off a little bit. You want to tell us a little bit about your history, your work history, where you come from, what you do, how you got started in this?
Yeah, sure. The intro was super kind. I have to thank my copyright gal, Holly, for that. It's a little little more than I would probably do. But yeah, I've started a software agency with my partner probably 7 years back. I was working for large companies here in Austin, like your Dell, Charles Schwab type companies, doing development mostly in the Microsoft stack of tools. And I had gotten there through some of the things that were mentioned in the intro, like publishing books and doing that kind of stuff, got me to the point where I was basically managing large offshore teams for these firms. And it was a place that, when you're in college and you're just taking your computer science class, you don't really think like 10 steps ahead. So it wasn't really where I imagined what I'd be doing, is trying to work with folks that, you have 36 people you're trying to communicate with, and you only have an hour in the day to do it. And it is huge cultural differences. And at that time, the market was, it was really tricky to find the right talent and things like that as well. So it was a really, really frustrating, those projects were super frustrating for me. It was really hard to create value. And so I was kind of wondering why are all these big companies doing this, and I went through a few different companies until I worked with my partner Prashant, and then him and I were able to, we worked together really well, and we were able to build a really, a team with a lot of great attributes. There's trade-offs there's so many different ways you can build teams with folks from different areas, and the different regions tend to have different characteristics. And so what we found is that combining strong architecture and product from the US with the right person building your team in India, my partner's in New Delhi right now, you can create a team that was kind of described in the intro there, where you can get really high velocity out of the team. And not for everything, But for most of your applications that are just taking data from the user and sending it to some place on the cloud or some data store or whatever, and back, which is I think 80% of the stuff out there, you can really create affordable, high velocity development. And that's what we've been focused on. Our motto is trying to make software predictable and affordable. If you've been in the engineering circles at all, you've probably heard about the engineering triangle, which is basically saying that you can have things good, fast, and cheap, and you can pick two of those items, right? And so basically that's what we did is we optimized on a good and cheap. And then it's not that when we build software, it takes way longer. It's just that what we don't do is commit to deadlines most of the time. But we find that most of our clients don't need a deadline. And we find that most folks, if you tell them, it's going to cost $80,000 or $100,000 or 50 or whatever it is, and take 2 to 3 months or 4 to 5 months or whatever, most folks prefer that to, it's going to take exactly 4 months, but we don't know exactly what it's going to cost you, or we can get it in 4 months and it'll cost you $80,000, but we can't guarantee it's going to be good.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it seems like an obvious optimization,
Yeah. One of the things that you mentioned in there is about being predictable and affordable. And I think that this is a challenge that a lot of people have, especially if they're kind of new or naive about software development. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about what you guys have done in terms of process to sort of make things predictable, especially if you're not, driven by deadlines, things like that. How can I be sure that, the experience I have is sort of predictable, and how do you set the sort of bars for people?
Yeah, so that's something that we've invested an awful lot of time in. The way we got the results we've gotten is our two key values that we've built the company off of are that clients are comfortable with their invoices. And then the second value is that we don't do anything for free. And so
I like that.
Those
Thank
two,
you.
Yeah. Well, they're actually contradictory. And what ends up happening is that if you've done any consulting, you know that things go wrong. And when they go wrong, it's like you're in a restaurant and the food came out cold or late or whatever, then you send out a dessert. You end up comping things off the bill, essentially. And so because every time something like that happens, we're going to end up taking something off the bill. We like to get something out of that. And what that has been for us is process changes. And so by dog fooding in that way and just constantly evolving our processes, we've gotten to where we have a really mature process from first conversation to kind of to launching the product. And basically the way it works is I have an article out there that's kind of clickbait title, something like the secret to software estimation lies in a dirty word, dot. And the dirty word is waterfall. Yeah. And so we feel that the only way that you can successfully predict your budget is you have to use a waterfall process. I don't know how familiar you guys are with process and your audience, but basically waterfall is an older process where you spend traditionally a lot of time upfront planning. It became notorious. I worked on some waterfall projects where we spend 6 months planning for a 1.5 year effort. And so it's just like these really huge release cycles and the whole market's moved by the time you get the product out. What we've done is we've leaned up waterfall a good bit. And so our first call with the clients is usually about an hour. We talk through their product at a high level and we get an idea of what they're trying to build and what they're trying to achieve. That's going to allow us, being me and Prashant, to tell them, it feels like a 4 to 6 monther, I don't like that whole, let me get back to you. Everybody wants a number quick, right? So we start out and we give you a number that's going to be like, a little bigger than what you need. We'll say, 4 to 6 months, whatever, and this is, we have our team costs and all that on the web. So you can kind of figure that out. And then the next step of the engagement, we work with our design partner, Cody at Grand Cave, and his team, and they'll take them. There's basically 2 SOWs to get you to your estimate. The first SOW is 5 to 10 hours, and it just does a user flow diagram. Most of the applications we do, there's a good bit of clarity if you understand the UI. There's exceptions to that. You could have a reporting app that does all the stuff in the back end, and this process wouldn't work well for that. But most of the apps we work, you can get a pretty good picture of what's going on from the UI. It's not like an iceberg, it's a tanker, if you know what I mean. So we'll have Cody go through and he'll spend 5 to 10 hours with the clients. They come out with this user flow diagram that'll show for every user, every place they can go and all the options that are available. And so it's actually pretty easy to get that level of understanding. Once we have that level of understanding, then Prashant and I can kind of look at it and we can kind of revise our guesstimate a good bit and say, you're actually kind of more on the 4-month side, because of this and that, or you're more of a 6, or maybe it's a 7 now, or whatever. And then that's not a huge investment from the client, and they've gotten an asset in their hands. You know what I mean? Because they can take that to another firm and say, hey, look, here's my initial design. Then from there, we do another discovery phase, which is 20 to 40 hours. And that one delivers mock-ups of the application, which are high fidelity. They show exactly what it's going to look like. And then there's a dev spec, which is a tie over from the waterfall days. And so the mock-ups are very well organized by features and sections of the application. And then if you go into the development specification, there's a table of contents that maps that. And what the dev spec adds to it is the business rules, right? And our goal is 80% with this. We're not trying to do 100%, because that's why waterfall didn't work well. So we try to get 80% clarity on the requirements, and we feel like most of the time we can. We have worked with some teams that they're so testing the market and that this approach to estimating doesn't work. But for most folks, they kind of have a pretty good idea of what they want to build when they start. And so then from there, Prashant and I, we take a deposit. It's like $3,300, and we'll take that design, that spec, and come up with a really detailed estimate that's just every single line item. And most of the estimates are between 2 hours and 24. So the thinking is it's a morning, it's a half a day, it's a day and a half, 2 days. Most of the stuff is going to be that up to 2 day range. There'll be a couple 24s. And then if we have really big complex items, like we don't know how to do this, we haven't done that before, it's your, I don't know, Bitcoin stuff or whatever, some kind of secret sauce for the app. For those, we'll usually say, okay, we're just going to put a month on the schedule. We're going to do a 40-hour spike. So somebody's going to spend a week figuring that out. And then we'll have a 3-week budget. And if we don't need it, we don't need it. But, we'll just let them know that that's some wiggle room there. And so then that gets us to where we have a really clear understanding, and every one of those line items match what's in the spec. Then we take all those line items, and one of our team leads will go and fill up Jira with epics and user stories that match both the estimate and the spec. And so then you kind of have a really lean process there, because you can actually go back and forth between the spec and the estimate by convention to find the requirements. We have a product owner now, a dedicated product owner, so he actually fills in a lot more detail on the tickets than we used to do. And then I'll meet with the clients, and I'll develop an entity diagram that just basically defines all the nouns and verbs of the system in a data format. So here's your database structure, essentially. We found that before we did the entity diagram, we would get some surprises, usually around subscriptions, how the users are related. So the user is a member of a store, that's a member of a company, that's a member of a and so you have where does the subscription hang off, and that kind of stuff, and it can affect your UI. So we'll do that entity diagram thing too, deliver all that to them, and then with that estimate, we'll pad each sprint. We only put 80% capacity, because like I said, we're aiming for 80% on this whole thing. And when we estimate the hours, we pad by 20% for the fact that we're estimating so quickly. So then each sprint, we fill it to 80%, and that calculates that 20% automatically, if you know what I mean. And then we have a 30% pad bucket. Well, it depends, 10 to 30% for requirements wiggle. And then we tag every ticket as MVP. And then as you go through, if you create new tickets, that those are coming from your bucket over there, your padding bucket. And then we put an assurance that says, we'll let you know when you have 20% budget left, before we go over 80% budget, if we're not going to make it, right? And so that actually puts you in a really good position, because when you still have 20% of your budget left, you can have the scope conversation.
I was just getting to that, because I mean, these projects are notorious for scope creep. And
Yeah.
it's always oh, can you add this, rating system that we didn't talk about before? And, oh, can you, add another tier to the subscription plan? And then it changes your whole
Right.
UI. So this is essentially you're taking care of your billing in advance with that 20% buffer. And once you hit that point, you have that scope creep conversation and say, hey, we're getting on there. Do you still need this review system, or do you still need this?
Yeah.
This, and then you can say, hey, we can address this at a later date, and we can just finish what we talked about initially, or we can add to the budget. That's essentially what you're getting at with that, right?
Yeah, exactly. It just empowers the clients to be able to decide how they want to land it. Like if you still want to land 100% on budget, then we're going to have to remove some items from scope that were some of your kind of nice to haves, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or we can keep going, but the number one thing for us is just to try to be really respectful with folks' budget. And so that's where like the whole affordable, predictable ethos comes in. We have a lot of things we do to try to make it affordable, as affordable as you can with quality. And then the predictability, like I said, comes in with us just being, making sure that our process, we learn from mistakes and that we're taking their budget serious and that kind of thing. And I've had some dev managers ask me like, how do you get your developers to estimate accurately? And I told them like, well, I didn't actually start accurately estimating until it started costing me money.
Right.
Take a little bit of the money back when they get it wrong. All of a sudden they're gonna get real fast, real quick with it.
Figure it out real quick. So
yeah.
I was wondering if maybe you could take us back to when you started the business and why you started the business. Obviously, you mentioned in your initial dialogue there, you mentioned that you were getting frustrated with some of the companies you were working with and the product stack you were working with. And it takes a little bit to say, hey, I'm going to go out and do this on my own. And then it takes a little more when you line up that first client and sign the first deal and say, oh crap, now it's on me to make. I've been down that before. And I have never had such a bad panic attack after that initial meeting as to right then. And it's scary as hell. So can you maybe talk about that first client and, how things went on the first go around working with a remote team?
Sure, absolutely. So the initial motivation for me is just my dad he's had some success as an entrepreneur, but like just obsessed with it when I was growing up and talked about it constantly. And there's like the nightly dinner table pitch about like, some crazy business idea or whatever for my whole life. So it's always kind of just been in there like that I wanted to do that. But actually making the leap, like you said, was a really kind of interesting time for me. I spent 2 or 3 years really being frustrated that I hadn't started a company. Like it was all I was thinking about. I was just obsessing on it. And I didn't understand, like, I'd be like in these rooms with other people who own companies that I worked at. And I'm just like, why is this guy able to pull this off? Like, what's special? What's special about this guy? Why can't I do this? And so I started listening to, I worked at a boutique consulting company here in Austin called Headspring, where they have a lot of people who publish books and like that kind of stuff, these high caliber developers. And the guy who runs it is a guy named Dustin Wells, and they just did everything so insanely proper over there. And so I decided to kind of research him a bit. And so I found some podcasts by him. And basically what he was describing was how he started his company when he was working at corporate jobs. And he was talking about working in the mornings and at lunch and all this kind of stuff. And that's essentially what I ended up doing to get to the point where I was winning these awards and doing stuff like that. I was doing a lot of community involvement, and that was just because I'm into it. I don't have as much time for that kind of stuff now as I used to, but I've been programming for fun since I was like really young. And so I just was always excited about meeting up with people and talking about tech. And so my community involvements led me to my first few clients. One of the clients that I was actually working on some code for earlier today, they've been one of our longest clients. I met him because he read my first book. And then another initial client of ours was someone who ran the .NET users group in town. And I knew him through that. And then, so just like through those community involvements is kind of where I got my initial leads. Prashant and I, who's my partner, like I said, we were working together at these large corporations, and Prashant was seeing the value that we were creating, and he's kind of like, I'd be up at 5 a.m. working with him because I wake up early, and he's like, man, it's like, F this, man. He's like, let's take this on the road, man. He's like, we're doing some cool stuff here. Let's go sell it to mid and small size companies. And so we both said, okay, let's try and do it, and we'll both work on it together. And if you sign a deal, you talk to me and we'll work together that way. If I get a deal, I'll talk to you and you'll get together, we'll go that way. Like we'll both try and sell, we'll both help do build the applications. So having a partner was really helpful. And then we got our first deal. I think our first one was this measuring app, it's called Smart Pictures, where you take photos with your phone and you can measure stuff on it. And we just kind of jumped in and just started building after hours. And what I did is I changed the way I got contracts so that I was always been an independent contractor, like 1099. But I changed the way I did contracts to where whenever I would get my main contract, I would not commit to a 40-hour week. I just tell them like, I can't commit to that. And I would explain to them that, I bill my hours honestly. And if I bill my hours honestly and work 9 to 5, like your full-timers, if I work the same hours your full-timers do and bill my hours honestly, I'm only gonna be billing about 34 hours a week, and that's the way I'd explain it. And they'd be like, oh, okay, yeah, if you want to charge us less, sure, And so, but that would get the contract set up. And that was a tip a buddy of mine gave me. That gets your main kind of day hustle to where it's like more official part-time, even though there's still some challenges to that. And then you just basically have to work 2 jobs, at least the way I did it. Because I had kids and stuff. It's not like I could go and just get in an apartment with someone and eat ramen noodles for 6 months and figure it out. Like my wife wouldn't have been down for that at all.
Yeah.
And so that's what made it work. And then the other flip side of it was I have a tremendously supportive wife. And, we have 3 kids, and there's really no way I know a lot of guys who wouldn't have been able to do this. They just don't have the support at home, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to know that your husband is completely unavailable when you got a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old or whatever, that's a pretty hard sell,
Yeah, no, makes sense. So I wonder, just sort of the next step, trying to look at this from the other angle, like if we're coming into this as a customer or somebody who thinks we need a development job done, can we talk a little bit about buying versus building? I know that This is the things on your little interview sheet that we had. And so maybe it's not that creative for us to be asking it, but at the same time, it's like, I think wildly important to understand the difference between buying and building and why you would do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one of the things that if people do get into consulting, I encourage you is to just be helpful. And so this is one of the ways I try to be helpful to business folks is to help them navigate this kind of stuff. And don't try and sell them stuff they don't need. Most businesses will have the need if you're doing custom software for some kind of custom software. And so usually what the heuristic I put out there to the business owners and stuff like that is that all the things in your business that are not unique and that are pretty similar to every other business out there, there's probably a product for it. Some guy in Austin or San Francisco is like, hey man, let's build this. And, and now there's a SaaS platform out there and some, trendy office downtown with like fancy water bottles and stuff like that. But for the things that make your business unique, like when, if you get into the entrepreneurship world, everyone talks about differentiators and things like that. Your differentiators are where you're going to have probably some value in getting something more custom done. So one of the examples I give is like, there's a company here in Austin that they do screen printed Yetis. Like, I don't know if you guys are in Texas or not, but Yetis are humongous down here. They like the coolers and the cups and all that. So there you go.
It's Ryan's got one right there.
Yeah. And so like, on my hat too. Right. So like, these guys will screen print and it looks really, or not screen print. What's it called? Powder coat. They'll powder coat it and put your logo on it and stuff like that. So if you're going to have part of your web application that's going to allow people to kind of put their logos and see them on there and kind of put that piece together, that's where you benefit from custom software. In your factory, writing some software that might control those machines and stuff would probably be something that would benefit you. All of that kind of stuff. And then even when it comes to your online, like you don't need to build the whole thing online, right? Like, I mean, there's a million shopping carts out there. You can run them headless. So you should be able to write all the just nuts and bolts stuff where add something to a cart, add some colors, customize, etc. with off the shelf tools. And you can just write custom for the things that you actually need custom for,
Yeah. I noticed on your GitHub, you guys have a boilerplate set up there. Is that the default go-to starting point for every new project that you start?
Yeah, so that's part of our affordable. Like we have a few things we do like to try and make things as affordable as possible. And so one of the things that makes anyone who writes software cringe when I say it is that we strongly discourage creativity. And so like, I know that sounds horrible, but you're going to be forced on every project to be creative. And so, do it when you have to, let's not be creative about like the 20% that gets 80% of the job done. So we create boilerplates for the technologies we work in, and those boilerplates are highly opinionated starting points. We don't spend endless hours debating about this stuff. I have a background in creating architectures, and I go talk at these talks and we show the boilerplates. Anyone on the team is more than welcome to jump in and contribute. But if you look at it's all open source. Anyone can get in there and do it. But it seems like in the company, it's mainly me and Misha that have been interested in doing that kind of work. And then what these boilerplates focus on, if you look at them, we actually call out the goals of the boilerplate. And I feel like that's super important because it really helps facilitate conversations about X versus Y approach. If everyone can agree that these are the goals that we're going for, we want good developer ergonomics. We don't want to use tools if we're not using features, things like that. Then when you're having debates about patterns and stuff like that, it goes a lot quicker because you could just say, well, that doesn't really align with the goals of the project. And so part of that whole boilerplate approach that we do is to help us hit the ground running. I try to flesh out the boilerplates with even like you want to have authentication figured out, routing figured out, validation figured out, data flow figured out, et cetera. And like I said, that's gets you 80% of what you're trying to get done. And it's why like if we use our boilerplates and we work with other teams, our initial velocity will be like insanely fast compared to the other teams. And we've had some problems with that. Where people are just, people get a little, because usually the other team will be the full-time employees, so that can kind of ruffle feathers if you don't handle that right.
Well, I mean, to take this to another world, like if someone sends me a Pro Tools file and I use Audition and someone else is working in Ableton and your team is all spread around each different DAW, you're going to have problems. Whereas if you start your team off on the same boilerplate, you're all used to working to the same software, WordPress, this, React, Node.js, whatever you're using. If you have that boilerplate and you have that 80% already built where everything's kind of there and you just go from there, it's going to speed everything up. It gets rid of a lot of the problems and headaches that, you would come into, Ryan, if someone sends you a paint file from 2000, you know what I mean? It's like same kind of thing. It's a good starting point. So, yeah,
exactly. And then we're not, we don't have to use our boilerplate. When we work with folks, a lot of times the code is already started. Or if they want to, they being the client, want to kind of come up with their own starting point, we have no problem with that. We'll pair with them or whatever. Or if they want to change ours, we don't mind. The main thing is we just want a cohesive, clearly defined approach. We want an instruction manual, And so that's another thing that I think differentiates us is that we always deliver software with a README that is helpful, right? That, shows how do you run this application? How do you debug it? And then what are the patterns that we're using in the application? And then, like I said, the values that we built it on, because I think that part of it never, I don't really hear a lot of people talk about that piece of it, but I feel like it's super important. Just because, like I said, you can just have so much analysis paralysis and people arguing and kind of, dropping the names of all these techniques that they've seen at blogs and, things like that.
Yeah.
One of the things that I think is particularly interesting about what you're talking about is that this company is basically a software company built by software engineers. And so instead of, maybe another like, I don't know, a startup or something that's got some marketing wizard or somebody running it, but it's got, and they've been working with the software team, but it's not like built in that way, right? Because I think what I'm really keying in on is just the attention you're paying to process. I mean, it's not about cutting corners. It's about having everything established and set up, so yes, it's faster by default, but it's not because you're trying to cut a corner. It's rather you're actually laying the groundwork ahead of time. And so I think that that's actually a really cool thing, and maybe just stereotypes, but characteristic of sort of a software engineer's kind of mentality or approach to building a business. So I think it's really interesting to hear you sort of describing these things in such detail.
Yeah. The analogy I use for it is most software engineers, I think the tendency, or like if you don't have a team that you organize like we've organized it, you'll end up with a bunch of craftsmen who are basically like blacksmiths, and they're all banging on a piece of metal till it looks like a sword. You know what I mean? And what we try to do is make it more of an assembly line. You know what I mean? So we all know exactly how to put this together, and we can move really fast because we're all doing the same thing, and the exact same part comes out the other end every time. So that's what we've done. Like I said, it's not everything for everyone. If you're trying to, figure out how to not make the latest, billionaire space rocket blow up when it lands, this might not be the best team structure for that, but, when you're building, the 10 millionth forms over data application to help manage this process, it works really well.
Yeah. I was wondering if maybe you could, so most small businesses can get by on, like a WordPress template or a basic, splash page website that, comes with their GoDaddy account. How does someone know that they need to take that next step and get something custom and pay the $50,000, $60,000, $80,000 to do it? And what are the benefits of going custom versus using an out of the box approach, like a plugin for WordPress to manage your shopping account?
Sure. Yeah. So that's a great question. For that, I think a lot of folks, before they build their first website, don't really even understand the different categories, so to speak, of websites, right? Like if you're on the business side of things, a website's a website. But really, like again, I always like using analogies. The analogy side of things, your website could be a business card, as the most simplest thing. It could be a marketing brochure, that, you're using to get, get people to understand more about your business. It could be like marketing brochure plus mailers. All of that level of it is going to be basically your WordPress stuff. And then if you get into very common online functionality, like e-commerce, and you have pretty standard products that you're selling, then you can use something like Shopify or the WordPress shopping cart or whatever you want to use. Where you start getting into more custom stuff is if you're selling, like the website itself is the tool, that's most likely going to be custom. Like if the website is no longer a marketing brochure or a business card or something like that, but it's actually like a calculator or some other kind of machine that does something, then that is where you get into your SaaS platforms, So whether you're helping people with their fitness or you're helping with business processes or doing accounting or whatever, that's going to be more of a custom. That's going to be a web application that actually is a custom built one. Now, in that space, as I mentioned earlier, if the problem is a very common problem, most likely there's off-the-shelf offerings there that you can take advantage of. But then once you start getting into where what you're offering is something that's not so common, then you need something custom. Like for our clients, one of our, more recent clients called Urgent Care, we have a case study about them on our website. and they're one of those urgent care clinics. And then they wanted to get into the telemedicine game, and specifically with schools. And so you have this successful, profitable business that needs to create what is a website, but it's a pretty complex website, right? And you're going to have mobile apps as well. And so then that's where you're going to need a custom system, because you have to be able to manage these business workflows and processes really well, of like adding students and doctors and nurses and care providers, all these business rules, all this reporting. That's where your custom stuff comes.
Yeah, makes complete sense. When you're working with a project like that, do you only take on 1 or 2 projects at a time, or do you have the capability to do 5, 6, 10? I mean, because if you have a lot of moving parts in one project, times that by 10, that's a lot of work and a lot of stuff to keep track of. What's your cap right now?
So we have about 10 projects we do right now. And that's been kind of our thing for a minute. And we scaled up, I think 2 years ago it was, or maybe it was last year, I can't remember. We went from 15 devs to 40 in 1 year. So we can scale pretty fast. And basically this year we've been focused on, because the way our offering works is the teams are a la carte, and you get a little bit of the US time zone folks who are a little bit more expensive for product architecture. And, we're starting to bring in some of that for bug fixing and things like that. And so we spread those across the projects. That used to be me. And it looked like about 8 projects, with 8 to 10 was about the most I could handle. Now we've hired folks in the US to scale that up. And we just did our 10-year roadmap where we're planning like 10 years and 5 years and 3 years, 2 years, 1 year, whatever. And on that, we're looking at growing probably about 20% a year for the next few years. So we would expect to be like in 3 years up to about 25 projects or something like that, Wow. But like you have to scale the teams up to do that. And so I've been focusing pretty heavily on one of the entrepreneur concepts is the skills that got you here won't get you there, meaning like once the business is actually sustainable and all of that, most likely you got it there because there's something that you were pretty good at, or you had some experience with. But to get the business from being that level to being a larger business, you have to switch from that skill set into the business skill set, which is like strategy and, culture and growing teams and all that kind of stuff, building teams.
Yeah. I know Ryan would like to go down a few other rabbit holes based off of that last little conversation there, but I know we're kind of pressed for time.
Sure.
Ryan, do you mind telling us, a little bit where people can go to find you and reach out if they want to get a project done or need help with something?
Yeah, the easiest thing is just to pop on the website, and there's a little pop-up window that happens, that pops up, and that actually comes straight to my phone. I'm on Twitter, but not active. But really just go to vicesoftware.com and you can just hit me up right there. Is the easiest way.
Good deal.
Great. So Ryan, I wanted to ask you just one more thing in these last couple minutes, not to get back in front of our outro, but I wanted to ask you one more question just about sort of the onshore versus offshore thing. So in the past, I run a creative agency, and in the past I've used offshore resources and things like this. And a lot of times, and it seems like it's changing, but this is where I want to get your perspective, is for a long time, it was sort of seen as like, I don't know, almost like to use somebody from a foreign country was like a cheap way, right? Like not necessarily the good way or the best way or the most powerful way of getting a developer or a designer or whatever. Mm-hmm. But, you were doing it to somehow shave off money so you could charge more money or that kind of thing, right? And I think it had kind of a yucky connotation for a long time.
Sure, absolutely.
It sounds like in your case, you've got a partner, from India who probably has, some connections or whatever. So maybe it's a little different than a lot of situations where they actually are just exploiting low pay individuals. Right. But I wonder if you would sort of talk about that and help me in sort of changing the view of people who might see using offshore resources as a negative. In my mind, people, they're very capable, they're very educated. They're no different than the people that we would work with here in the States outside of maybe the time zone. And so I wonder if you'd just sort of talk about your experience in using an offshore team versus what would be, I guess, more a traditional onshore team. and and just sort of help me in dispelling whatever negatives people might have about that sort of situation.
Sure. So our offering is a managed offering. And the reason why we structured it that way is because we feel that's the solution to it. You really have to have a person managing the project from the same region that you're building the code in, that is really plugged into the culture. You know what I mean? So I'm here in the States and I can talk to US developers and understand it. And there's it's almost impossible to be successful in what I'm doing without noticing the different traits that folks have in these different regions. Like, people aren't robots, but there's definitely certain personality traits and things like that that tend to dominate in each area. And what will happen with the US team versus the Indian teams, my senior Indian developers are super capable and things like that. But if they get on a call with the US guys, and there's some kind of technical disagreement or something like that, a lot of times they just get bulldozed. And I think it's just a cultural thing. They're much more passive and like they're much more, we'll tell you, okay, yeah, we'll just do it that way, whatever. And so having me there to help mediate those conversations and things like that has been super valuable for us. And then it is, without a doubt, there's been just nightmarish quality with this kind of approach. And that's why we saw a huge opportunity to try and disrupt it. And the secret sauce that Prashant and I have found is having a guy like Prashant over there who understands how to hire the right people, and get them trained and get them to kind of build things the way that we want them built and things like that. And then having people like me and Ray and the team we have here to interact with the clients and be able to communicate back and forth and get the work really well organized in a consumable way. You've only got 1 hour a day to collaborate, and you have to just really iterate your processes. Like, for example, we have a rule that you can't be stuck more than an hour. So you can't have that rule if there's not a lot of work for people to grab. So if someone gets stuck, they're stuck for an hour, then they wait until, US time zone, and we'll fix the problem then. So people don't just rabbit hole all day. Yeah. And then as far as the other side of it, where it might be distasteful because you're going in and you might be taking advantage of the market or something like that. What we do is, for one thing, we're creating an agency that is trying to buck that stereotype. So I think a lot of our team takes pride in working with us because we're saying, no, we're an agency that builds quality. We have great devs from India. So that's one of the values we add. The other value we add is that we hire folks who are very junior. And Prashant has come up with this way of doing that with IQ tests and things like that. He can evaluate folks very quickly on whether or not they can, they have the skills to build software, and we get them in. And because, like I said, we have this really organized process, we use the same patterns and all that kind of stuff. We'll get them into a pod with other folks, and they can be very productive very quickly. And another thing we do is our senior devs have been with us for a really long time. They're highly incentivized. We pay them really well. We probably break even or take a loss on most of them. They are the people that communicate with the US folks. We don't even require that all of the individual contributors can communicate well with people in the States, because that limits your market a good bit. And so we're giving an opportunity to a lot of those folks who wouldn't have it in that way. But also, our teams are black boxes. So if you want a 4-person capacity team, you're going to be getting 4-person capacity, but it might be 6 people working, to get that capacity, because maybe we had to fire some people who didn't work out very well, and we've hired some new people and we're putting them in, but we're able to keep it nice and consistent. And then if say we can't get 8 hours, like say you're supposed to have 40 hours a week capacity from one developer. If we can only get 12 hours out of them, we're only going to bill for 12 hours. And that's where that whole timeline versus budget thing comes into picture. You know what I'm saying? So we'll eat the cost on that to make sure that we get there on time, because we're ramping this person up. But that also allows us to get quality out of it. So our way of getting the quality out of it was to create a really tight process, be really smart about how we hire the folks, and then have the right people onshore and offshore. And then our company used to, and it still probably does, like the individual contributors, they have kind of a 1 to 2 year loop through the company usually, because they'll get the skills they need to get onto like a multinational. So we're paying above market when they're junior. And then at some point there's an inflection point where all of a sudden they've gotten a lot of skills and they can go off and and they get a price point that's a little above what we would want to charge. And so, we're happy that we got them there that far on the ride, and then we can always bring new, fresh people in, so that's kind of how we're doing it.
Well, no, I really appreciate you taking the time to sort of outline that. I mean, obviously a lot of this conversation has been about process and the things that you guys have done to really build a nice, sound, snug business. But I really like to also hear, just sort of the steps that you're taking to really, I guess, empower these people, right? Because I think that there is opportunity for so many people to take advantage of folks. But I think to do it right is the way that you're describing. You have the cultural aspects. You're building out the processes, that make these people provide opportunities and help make them successful. And I just love to hear about that investment, because I think that is the future. I think that's the way people will use offshore. And I think you're starting to see more and more of that. I just know, for the longest time, I know, a handful of other people sort of in my space that would use these guys, they'd hire the guy in Bangladesh for $5 an hour. And
that's not gonna be good.
Turn around and bill it, for $50 an hour or $100 an hour or something. And it was just, but it was purely exploitive. It wasn't about helping this guy build a career or build a better life. It was just how can I do this for less? So I love what you guys are up to.
No, we try to make it win-win for everybody. We want to make sure we feel good about stuff. The biggest attribute for Prashant and I that we haven't really done a proper values for our organization with all the little sayings and all that kind of stuff. But the integrity piece is probably the biggest thing for us that we hire and fire around. And so we just and this also goes with clients. Like if we have integrity problems with clients, we'll usually wind those projects down as well. And so if you build an organization off integrity, you usually end up in a pretty good spot,
I like it. Yeah. Do you guys take on existing projects? So like if someone has a PHP site that's a little outdated, needs updated, do you guys do work like that, or do you have to start from the ground up?
Yeah, we do. We have a few requirements. We have to have someone get the code running on our machine. We have to be able to debug the code during this pairing session, and then we have to be able to deploy it to a useful place. And if you can get us that far, then the next step is that we'll review the code with you, and we might come back with some refactor recommendations that are purely around making the code cohesive and making sure that we can do this high velocity thing that we like to do. If somebody comes in and they've got a system that's like a big ball of mud, kind of a architecture, and you really have to have that archaeological hat on, getting things done, those could be a little bit more challenging for us. We're always happy to take a look, but I found that these days, it's way less common to see these code bases that are a total mess than it used to be for some reason.
Yeah.
Used to, it was always Wild West. I mean, it's just just craziness, but now it's really rare. I've been really surprised. Like the last 5 years, almost every single time we get in a code base, everyone's following kind of the same patterns, and it's consistent, which I don't know if you guys program or how long you've been programming, but like 10 years ago, it was not like that. Freaking nightmare.
I can imagine.
Everybody's just doing their own thing,
Well, thanks so much, Ryan. This has been awesome. I really appreciate you taking the time to visit with us. Do you mind saying just one more time where people can find you?
Sure. Yeah. Just come visit me at vicesoftware.com. There's a little pop-up on there, and that'll get you straight to my phone or computer, depending on where I'm at.
Great. Well, thank you so much again, Ryan. And we appreciate it. Really glad that you had the time to spend with us today.
Absolutely. I appreciate you guys having me on, and you'll have a great day.
Absolutely. And thanks so much to everybody who tunes into the show this week and every week. And see you all next time.